Hello and welcome to a quick reviewer training for combined sections meeting education session reviewing. This is being recorded in spring of 2025. My name is James Crick. I'm currently a program co-chair for APTA Acute Care, and we designed this in order to give reviewers who may have less experience just a quick overview of what the process is for reviews, to hopefully be a resource to help level the floor, so to speak, and so that people are comfortable joining into the review process and participating at this level. So first, a huge thank you. If you're watching this video, then you've likely agreed to lend your expertise as a reviewer for education session proposals for CSM. If you are unaware, the way this works is that proposals are submitted by presenter teams with the understanding that there is a fair, equitable, and transparent process for determining which sessions are accepted. At the time of this recording, there are two education session co-chairs for APTA Acute Care for CSM who report to an education liaison who is a board member for the academy. Different academies work differently in terms of their structure, but that's how it's set up for acute care. Now, this fair and transparent process does not occur without your volunteer contribution, and so for that, we thank you. Our objectives for this short recorded talk are to understand the rules and guidelines for CSM presentations, to learn how to apply the existing scoring criteria for proposal review, to recognize considerations for session selection, and as well as to identify red flags and best practices. Now, there's an important caveat that the APTA and the academies have contracts that change on a several-year basis. And this can change to a small degree how CSM functions, including how proposals are selected. So if you do have particular questions and you're not watching this, within just a few weeks of its recording in spring of 2025, certainly reach out to the current program chairs, as there could be small items that are different. Now, in addition, I'm aiming to provide this introduction that is sort of evergreen, and so it won't hopefully be significantly influenced by any contractual changes that might occur over time. So first, peer review is a systematic evaluation process in which experts, and you guys are the experts, assess the quality, relevance, and rigor of proposals to ensure that they meet criteria and contribute meaningfully, in this case, to CSM and to acute care physical therapy. The goals of peer review are to compare submissions against objective criteria, to promote transparency while reducing bias and encouraging diverse perspectives. So if it's just the program chairs or just the board members who are in the process or providing the peer review, then CSM probably looks different than if the population of physical therapists across this country are represented. Then we probably have a much better, much more strong and robust process. And the more people there are that can participate in that, not only is it a great learning experience to see where sort of the cutting edge of the field is, but it also ensures that for anybody who is submitting proposals, that they feel confident that they can trust that they will get a fair and equitable review for their proposals, whether they are ultimately accepted or not. So some general items, the APTA prohibits sponsored sessions. So this is really the primary thing that we'll talk about in terms of like a red flag is going to be conflicts of interest. Now, people can disclose some conflicts of interest, and yet their talks are not related to, a financial conflict of interest that they have. And so if they have not disclosed anything and you are concerned that there might be a conflict of interest, and we'll talk about an example of this later, then certainly there's a place within the review platform to where you can indicate that, you can highlight that for the programming chairs. Importantly as well, if you have a conflict of interest, then there's also a spot for you to abstain from review. So if you work with somebody closely, for example, who has submitted a proposal, and by happenstance you get assigned to review that proposal, then it might make sense for you to say, hey, I work closely with this person. I'd like to recuse myself from the review process. We would be grateful for that. So currently the APTA uses a Confex meeting platform to manage proposals. That's certainly something that could change in the future, but that's the way that it's been for a number of years now. And so when you do complete your reviews, you will get a Confex link and login and some instructions for how to use Confex. We're not going to go into that necessarily within this talk. With the current CSM planning schedule, reviews are conducted in the spring. So that's typically completed like over a 2 to 3 week period in normally the late April or early May. And then final decisioning is made by the programming chairs, which is really heavily reliant on peer reviews. We let peer review work while trying to just comprehensively consider programming as a whole. So depending upon the year, we normally have somewhere in the neighborhood of 25 to 30 sessions, and yet we might get, 60, 70, 80 session proposals. And so what we're looking to do is to create a balanced portfolio of presentations in order to be attractive to a wide audience. So this just kind of visualizes from the submission portal closing up through the review portal opening and the review deadlines occurring. This is typically about 2 weeks, again, in late April or early May. And then finally, there's programming chair decisioning after that. Then typically in the summer, there are acceptance and rejection notices sent out, and then scheduling occurs in kind of a prolonged period over the late summer and into the fall, in conjunction between the APTA and the programming chairs. So how do we score our proposals? And I'm going to show you some proposals here in a moment, in particular the specifications of what each proposal will be scored on. But just in general, we're looking for the clarity of objectives, the speaker qualifications, and with this, we're asking you to be objective. I'm going to talk a little bit more about things that the program chairs might consider after the review process has been done. But if we have really strong speakers, or if we have somewhat inexperienced speakers, it's okay for you to call that out. That does not mean that a session will be accepted or not accepted, but it does help to color our decision-making process, which again, I'll speak to a little bit more here in a few moments. Certainly, we're really focused on evidence-based content, right? So if you're reviewing a proposal and you're not convinced necessarily that there's evidence backing whatever it is that they are describing or proposing, even if it is in practice, then we have to question whether or not we should be giving continuing education credits for exposing therapists to this new content. And then finally is relevance to acute care PT practice. Now, this is really important that I don't think everybody necessarily understands, is that within the Academy of Acute Care Physical Therapy is also limb loss and amputee focused practice. So you may have, limb loss and or amputee focused sessions that you are asked to review. Now, you may not be an expert in that, and that's okay, but we still want you to give a review for that. And again, we'll be considering comprehensively to try and make sure that we do give some balance to that. So even if it is related to limb loss or amputee focused practice, that's not centrally, focused on acute care practice, that's okay. Again, you can make mention of it. However, we may have some of those proposals depending upon the year as well. Okay, let's dive into the sections of the proposal. So the primary concept, kind of overarching all of this, that we want reviewers to consider is alignment. Alignment between primarily the title, the session description, the session outline, and the objectives. So first, you'll see on when you're reviewing a proposal, you'll see the title of the talk and the type. So when you're doing these types of reviews, it might be a pre-conference course, which is typically 1 day's worth of content. It can be 2 days, although that's less common. Or it's an education session, which is 90 minutes worth of content. Now, the presenters will select amongst the 3 content levels that you see on the screen, from fundamental to intermediate to advanced. Again, this should just give you an idea of who they're targeting, as well as what type of depth that they're going to go into for that topic in particular. Next is the session description. You can see I pasted here. This is what's in the proposal platform for authors as they are describing their planned session. So they get 250 words to explain the overall purpose of their session. Next, there is a session outline. Now, this should give you a very clear idea of what the session will look like. This is, again, 90 minutes moving forward from here. And so what you should do by looking at that outline is have a pretty good idea. You're not having to make many assumptions. So we do want the proposers to be pretty specific about what they're going to be touching on, what the subtopics are, maybe even approximate time limits for how they are going to touch on that content. What that does is that just gives us a lot of confidence as reviewers and as program chairs, and for all of us, that are involved in this process, to know that they are well prepared, that they've thought through this deeply and meaningfully, and that they're going to be equipped to provide the content in a really rigorous way. And then finally, learning objectives. We're all, I think, familiar with learning objectives, but they should finish the statement upon completion of this session. Attendees will be able to, and then we can use actionable verbs, from Bloom's taxonomy. Each learning objective needs to be addressed by the speakers during the presentation. So again, going back to alignment, we want to see that the learning objectives fit with the outline, which also fits with the description as well as the title. Finally, we have two other categories, the first being references. Now, the rationale for requiring references published in the past 7 years is to allow for continuing education credits to be applied. So sometimes we get the question of saying, well, we have a landmark article that we want to make sure that the reviewers know that we know and that we're going to be referencing. And that's okay to include, but we have to have at least 5 references which are no more than 7 years old. So that's a rolling time frame depending on when you're listening to this, because it's 2025 and we'll be talking about 2018 or later. So you can include that landmark article from 2010, but you also need to have 5 more current bibliographic references. And again, that's so that continuing education credits can be provided to participants. And then finally, speakers. So when you look at the speakers, and I have not, on purpose, I have not included any speaker information in this presentation, but it will give a bio as well as their speaking experience. Within their bio, it will also, of course, tell you a little bit about who they are and what they've done. And so the 2 important things to consider first is potentially multidisciplinarity. Working in acute care, it's not always that we are working in the silo of physical therapy or even rehabilitation. And so sometimes we've had some really strong proposals because they have brought medical leadership or nursing leadership or case managers or respiratory therapists, folks who have a different perspective that would be important for physical therapists to know. So I think the question to ask yourself is, would you want to hear from these people's experience and perspective about this topic? Again, considering that alignment. Now, be wary of both very small, like 1 person, and very large speaking teams. There are conversations ongoing about caps on the number of speakers per session. I encourage reviewers not to worry too much about this, because this seems to be an annual conversation, and so it's probably subject to change. Ultimately, the program chairs will reach out to speaking groups if changes are required. So if somebody proposes a really strong session and they have 8 presenters, we might say, hey, that's going to be a little bit too much. We like the proposal. Is there a way that you can consolidate the number of speakers? That doesn't tend to happen a whole lot, particularly because individuals who are accepted, they get 1 day's worth of their CSM registration fees waived, but that's only up to 4 presenters. So typically the cap tends to be about 4. But again, for the purposes of reviewing, I'd really just like for you to put into the comments if you feel like this team seems appropriate, or the team seems too big, or the team seems too small, or something like that. So please do use the comments, which I'll talk to you about here in a moment. So scoring is currently on a 1 to 10 scale, ranging from inadequate to exceptional, and each has a brief definition. So at the time of this recording, there's actually a couple different rating scales that have been passed around. So the one that you'll see on the screen here next is going to be reflective of the one that was used most recently. Again, I just encourage you to familiarize yourself with it. Lower scores are worse, higher scores are better. There are descriptive terms with it. And so just make sure you familiarize yourself with whatever the scoring numbers and names are before actually designating scores for each of the sections. So this is what it looks like on the back end as the program chairs begin to make final programming determinations. So each column here represents an individual peer reviewer who have each reviewed the same proposal. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 reviewers for this proposal. So we're going to look at each topical area, but I just want to point out that, for example, 5 satisfactory in this definition, that was a click box. So, each individual did not write these things in. This was just a click box for them. A radio button that, they said it was 7 for research, 5 for topical area, 6 for quality, and so on and so forth. So after research, we do have the total topic. Is this pertinent to acute care physical therapy? Does this make sense for the contemporary moment for presentation at CSM? A good example of this might be presentations related to COVID. that when we were in the throes of the COVID-19 pandemic, we had a lot of really competitive and interesting proposals about COVID. And yet here we are, thankfully, several years later, and occasionally we'll get something that centers on, COVID or COVID response, and you can just see how that might be a little bit less pertinent. Whereas now, perhaps there's much more of a focus on post-COVID related illness and care, and perhaps even how does, acute physical therapy and or, post-intensive care syndrome, post COVID-19 syndromes, how do these things contribute to current practice trends? Do we have some innovative models by which organizations are providing care for these individuals? Those would be things that might be more topically relevant now, and who knows what might come up in the future. So that's one of the reasons why we do have many peer reviewers, is to make sure that we get a good spread of topical expertise, as well as to understand interest. Next is the quality of the proposal overall, as we've talked about, again, really considering alignment between the title, the session description, the session outline, the session objectives, and making sure that then the speakers, which is our next category here, that they're qualified to talk on this, right? So you can have a really strong proposal, but if their bio doesn't give you much sense at all that they might be really qualified to talk on these topics, then that's something, again, to just reflect as part of your review. And then finally, we get these overall totals. Now, this is an important piece here, that a proposal that does not score well among reviewers is almost certainly not going to be accepted. However, just because a proposal scores well does not guarantee it will be accepted. So a good score overall is necessary but not sufficient to be selected. That's a function of the high number of highly competitive proposals that we receive each year. Now, in addition to scoring using the provided numeric scale, there's an option to provide both private and public comments. So public comments are not shown on the screen because there weren't any for this proposal. But be aware that public comments are viewable by the proposers themselves, whereas private comments are a communication only viewable by program chairs and APTA staff. So this is where you can communicate in these private comments directly with the program chairs about each session. I want to say this really strongly. Please complete these. Comments can add incredibly helpful color that we use to help inform decisioning determinations. So as we're thinking through, from the programming chair perspective, if we have proposals that score really similarly, and we only have, maybe a spot or two left, then oftentimes we will lean on peer review comments to try and, serve as a tiebreaker. We never want to be the arbiters of who gets accepted and who doesn't get accepted. We want to lean really heavily into the peer reviewers in order to make sure that we're being as objective and transparent and fair as possible. So let's take a look at an example. Recall first, the primary concept we want you as reviewers to consider is alignment amongst the title, session description, session outline, learning objectives, and are the speakers qualified to speak on this topic. So for example, here, you can see I removed the title from this slide, but we have a session description that's pretty clear. I'm not going to spend time on this. You can pause the recording here, but it's pretty clear. It makes it fairly understandable about what it is that they're interested in presenting, why it is important, and who will benefit from hearing this talk. The session outline. Take note of its comprehensiveness and clarity. This gives a really rich idea of what will be covered in the session. An incomplete proposal outline is unlikely to score well, as they've described what they want to present in the session, but not how they will present it in the outline. So also note that the proposal authors have left little to the imagination in terms of timing. So you can see 20 minutes, subtopic of 5 minutes, and 10 minutes, presumably 5 minutes here. They declared the approximate amount of time they will spend on each portion of the outline. So this should assure you as a reviewer that they have thoughtfully considered how they will allocate their time. A proposal that does not include time components can still score well, but you'll have to make a more subjective judgment as to whether or not you think they have thoughtfully considered how they will allocate time and that they can complete their proposed presentation in the amount of time provided. So there's times as well where if somebody's not including specific time snippets, and they have a ton of content, then you might question, and again, put this in the comments, I don't know if they can get through this in the 90-minute limit. Now, an important thing to note if you are doing the math at home, that this is probably 120 minutes. It's very recent that we're switching to that the APTA as a whole has moved us to 90-minute slots. And so this is probably adding up closer to 120. Finally, again, our objectives. So this is exactly what it looks like. This is a screenshot for this same proposal. You can see how the objectives align with the session description and the session outline. And then finally, the references note that they are impactful papers as well as recent papers, including citing things like the APTA reports, so the economic value of physical therapy. So some very important things that they included within their references. So we felt strongly and our peer reviewers specifically felt strongly that this was a well put together proposal. So now zooming out a little bit, what we're asking of each of you is to be pretty zoomed in on each of these topics, right? So each proposal, you're going to provide an individualized peer review, and you're going to do that for the number of peer reviews or proposals that you're given. What we as program chairs will do then, after we get all of the reviews in, is we're going to look again at the scores, we're going to look at the comments, and then we're going to consider the balance of topics and content. So we don't want to have, preponderance of just niche topics. And we don't also want to have just a whole bunch of kind of general use topics. We want to provide a balance of these. Same thing for basic, intermediate, and advanced levels. So if you imagine CSM, we want to ensure that we have content and programming that is appropriate for students, as well as for seasoned clinicians, as well as for administrators and managers and folks who have significantly different backgrounds and experience levels. So it's our job to again, look at the forest, so to speak, after you guys have looked at each of the trees individually. In addition, there's a constant conversation where we always want to encourage speaker diversity. And particularly here, we're mentioning seasoned versus new speakers. So I think many academies, including Acute Care, we have some outstanding researchers and academicians who are well prepared and have given lots of talks in the past. And quite honestly, they draw a lot of folks. People see the name and they say, oh boy, we're interested in that talk, kind of irrespective of what it is. But we also don't want to make it a club where only those who have experience get the opportunity to present at CSM. So we always look to balance new speakers with seasoned speakers as well. And then finally, we are constantly looking back at multiple years of, we get data from the APTA about which sessions were attended highly or were not attended highly. So we consider that in terms of topic, as well as some of the ratings that we get for each of the presentations. And then of course, we try and avoid duplication from previous years. Couple of red flags to be aware of. The first I mentioned at the outset was undisclosed or apparent conflict of interest. So what would that look like? This is a contrived example. I can't think of an example over the last several years where we've had an issue with somebody not disclosing a conflict of interest or where this has really come up, but it's obviously important and we want to be ahead of. So for example, if somebody runs a continuing education company about some type of niche topic, so this likely indicates that they're an expert, which is a good thing. However, if their presentation, if they're in their proposal, it's indicating that they could be perceived as soliciting interest specifically for their con ed company, they're trying to drive up business, this would be inappropriate. So conflicts of interest are pretty rare, but they are serious. And if you are reviewing a proposal and are concerned about this, please include it in the private comments. Now, this does not guarantee that a conflict of interest exists or that a proposal will be treated differently. It just highlights to the program chairs that this deserves a bit more investigation and scrutiny amongst the many other people that will be reviewing. Second, lack of evidence supporting. We mentioned this before. If they don't have good evidence to lean on, then it's probably not something that we can give continuing education credits for, and maybe it's too preliminary for something like a full education session. If speakers don't have experience or expertise in the topic, that's probably a red flag. And then recognize duplication from prior years. Duplication meaning basically the same presentation from a prior year. So there are always topics that we will consider running, for example, for students or new clinicians, but we aim to hit on these in new and novel ways. So examples of this might be things like critical care practice or mechanical ventilation or lab values or things of that nature that are common questions for folks who don't have experience in that, but we don't want to just reprise prior presentations year after year. So finally, our ask of you, be as objective, fair, and clear in your reviews as you can. So if you think something is excellent, or if you think something is terrible, put that in the private comments. That gives us a lot of really good color. And in particular, this is the case for if something's kind of, it's in the middle, right? It's not great, but it's also not bad. So this should be reflected in both your numeric and your textual review. So consider these two reviews here. Review 1, interesting session. So if that's all we have to go on, that doesn't really give us a whole lot to make it stand out. Whereas review 2, highly relevant to acute care practice, outline is clear, timing is appropriate, multidisciplinary speakers have expertise in the topic, they need one more reference to meet minimum criteria, and may co-sponsor well with geriatrics. That would be an extremely helpful review. That if we're comparing, review 1 versus review 2, if these are two different proposals, then we have much stronger evidence now because of review 2's private comments to be able to understand why they thought it was helpful, where they thought any of the detractions were in their scoring to help us distinguish between these two. Again, if you have a conflict, you're closely related or work closely with somebody who's on the proposal where it's your proposal yourself, or for some reason, if that were to ever sneak through, please abstain from reviewing, of course. And then please complete and submit your reviews on time. If something comes up and you cannot complete the reviews or need additional time, please reach out to your program chair as soon as possible so that we can make alternative considerations. We all work on pretty tight timelines around this, and so we understand that life comes up. What we can't have is, the final day we get that email of saying, oh, by the way, I can't complete my reviews. That really throws a wrench in things. Whereas if we have a few weeks of leeway, knowing that, John Doe is unable to complete his reviews, then we can help to find other people, or we can distribute those proposals to other reviewers. So if you have questions, please reach out to your current programming chairs or the education committee chair in the academy. And this includes for any technology troubles, for any technology that might be used for this in the future. And remember, you're not expected to be an expert in every aspect of acute care practice, but you likely have some expertise to share, and you can certainly have a perspective to share as somebody who maybe has attended CSM or wants to attend CSM. So again, we thank you for your service to the profession and to the Academy of Acute Care Physical Therapy. I hope this was helpful. If you do have questions, please reach out. Thank you.